News Talk 610 AM and 102.1 FM. KVNU.
It's time to take a look at this hour's news headlines. Here on KVNU, I'm J.D. Walker. A man has been sentenced to probation after his child was found malnourished and suffering from bone fractures, while charges against the child's mother were dismissed. Justice Robert Owens, 27, pleaded guilty to a misdemeanor count of intentional child abuse. On April 23rd, a 3rd District Court judge suspended a 364-day jail sentence in favor of 24 months of probation. A secondary felony charge was dismissed under the plea agreement. Felony child abuse charges against the mother, 30-year-old Cheyenne Olson, were also dismissed without prejudice on February. A couple was charged in July 2025 after a pediatrician discovered the child had a fractured arm, inflicted bruising, and severe malnourishment. Investigators noted Justice Olson served as a primary caregiver. Court documents cited private messages where Cheyenne Olson called him lazy and neglectful regarding the child's care. In other news, a 48-year-old Brigham City contractor has pleaded guilty to stealing more than $35,000 in antique coins and firearms while working on a Cache County home remodel. Adam Richard Swenson accepted a plea deal on April 22nd in 1st District Court in Logan, pleading guilty to 2 counts of second-degree felony theft. North Park Police investigated in January after a homeowner noticed items missing from his cabinet accessible to a remodeling crews. The victim, who was selling the collection online to fund the project, recorded $20,125 in missing coins, $15,388 in stolen firearms. Detectives recovered some property after Swenson gave the coins to relatives, falsely claiming he acquired them in Texas by trading cocaine. Following a February 17th search warrant at his residence, officers recovered additional items, and Swenson confessed to the theft. Swenson remains held without bail and will be sentenced June 10th. And finally, a 24-year-old man died and a motorcyclist was critically injured Friday in a chain reaction crash caused by a speeding hit-and-run driver on State Route 59. Authorities said the collision occurred near milepost 14 when a black passenger car illegally passed traffic in oncoming lanes. A Chevrolet Avalanche swerved to avoid the car, overcorrected, and struck a westbound Chevy Malibu driven by Dallin Magnuson. Magnuson, a welder who was training for his first marathon, was airlifted to the hospital where he later died. The family described the youngest of 5 siblings as someone who always brought happiness to those around him. A motorcyclist identified by friends and family as Jared Frederickson was critically injured after swerving to avoid the chaos and being thrown from his bike. 2 others suffered non-life-threatening injuries. The Utah Highway Patrol continues to search for the driver of the black car. Hold Tree Care giving you a look at this hour's weather. Emergency cleanup, stump grinding, or routine maintenance is who Hold Tree Cares. Visit them at holdtreecare.com. Rain throughout the day today with a high of 64. What I was going to mention is that all we have to do to get to the sunshine is get through today. After a rainy day throughout today, we're going to see sunny skies on your Wednesday with a high near 61, and Thursday 71 and sunny, and Friday going to be gorgeous, sunny and 75. That's a look at this hour's news headlines here on KVNU. I'm J.D. Walker.
This is Matt Robbins with Quality First Insurance, and we are now Alera Group. This is great news for you. Now you have more choices and strength of a top national broker in your corner with our local personal service. Every situation is unique. Now we can tailor coverages from deductibles and limits to risk management, so it fits you even better. Let's compare options and tighten your program. Same friendly faces, same local office. Call 435-752-0101.
As our world changes, we'll keep you up to date with the latest information. News Talk KVNU 102 FM 610 AM.
Alpine Home Medical, we bring wellness home.
Are you on your feet a lot? When traveling, do you find yourself sitting for long periods of time? Hi, I'm Jay Broadbent with Alpine Home Medical, and we have compression stockings that can help you. Our compression stockings are designed to improve circulation, reduce swelling, and provide unmatched comfort. Come check out all the different styles and fabrics. These aren't your great-grandparents' compression stockings. That's why we're excited to offer an amazing deal. Buy 3 pairs of compression stockings and get a free care kit. That's right, 3 pairs of compression stockings and get a free care kit. Come into any of our 11 locations and invest in your health this winter by embracing the benefits of compression. For more details, visit us at alpinehomemedical.com. That's alpinehomemedical.com.
Alpine Home
Wednesday edition, Clay and Buck will continue to discuss the ongoing Strait of Hormuz blockade. Are ships moving or not? What is the absolute latest? We will break all of that down for you. Plus, primary day underway. What is the impact and what do we expect to see with the big primaries coming out of Tuesday? That will be the Wednesday edition of Clay and Buck.
10 to 1 on News Talk KVNU, 102 FM and 610 AM.
Let the good times roll. Let them rock you around.
Welcome back to KVNU's For the People. Hour 2 of today's show. It is time for this month's installment of the For the People Book Club with Craig Petersen joining us here in the studio. And Craig and I were just talking about the book we'll be discussing today, and I was kind of wondering out loud why I find books like this so fascinating. The book is Everything is Tuberculosis, The History and Persistence of Our Deadliest Infection by John Green. And these types of, this is kind of investigative journalism type book writing. And it's something like to see the mechanisms of, I don't know if you want to say our healthcare system. I mean, that's part of it, but also, how we interact with the environment around us when it comes to pathogens and viruses. And this is fascinating and sometimes even frightening stuff.
Yeah, this one's a lot about the failure of social systems.
Yeah.
In addition to the success of science. Yeah.
I found myself, as I was listening, I found myself thinking over and over, I can't believe this happens. I think we like to think that we're sort of beyond some of this, but we're not, obviously. I have to ask, what drew you to this book?
We're in a book club, and every August we get together and recommend books.
Really?
And this was recommended.
It was on the list.
Yeah, it was on the list. Yeah, so I didn't found it. It was found by me.
Okay.
Found for me.
Found for me.
Yeah.
So, sometimes those are the most fun books.
Yeah. We've had really good luck with these. This is just to give you a little bit of background on the book. It's been out for just over a year. It came out in March of 25. New York Times #1 bestseller. 250,000 ratings on Goodreads.
Wow.
1 million copies sold. But here's by far what I found to be the most interesting thing about the book. So John Green is the author, and of that 1 million copies that have been sold, he actually personally signed 110,000 copies.
Really?
Took him about 200 hours to do it.
That's wild.
And the other thing about that, too, he wanted to verify to people that he really had signed it. And so what happened is he did it in different colors of magic markers. And so he could actually tell you, based on the color, when he signed your particular book.
Really?
Yeah. I went and looked at his
cool.
signature. It's a little less impressive because the signature is basically a J and a G and then squiggles.
Oh, so he cheats.
Yeah, it's not.
That's what I would have to do, though.
Yeah, me too. But I thought that was interesting that he'd take the time to do that.
That's actually fascinating.
Yeah.
An appreciation for the people that are, buying and reading your book. He's a great writer. He writes. This is such a cliche thing to say. You see this in blurbs all the time on the back of books for nonfiction. That it's investigative journalism that's happening, but it reads like you're reading a fictional novel.
Yeah.
It's got pacing and a intriguing plot, but this whole thing starts with him meeting a person in Sierra Leone, right? Mm-hmm. And tuberculosis, and that's where he becomes curious about this.
In fact, you talked about him being a good writer. I think one of the things that made this book attractive is it really has two tracks. One is a very scientific track about the history and impact of tuberculosis, but the other is this very personal track of this young man that he meets, and he follows through in the book about what happens to this young man that has tuberculosis. And I think the fact that you're able to put a face on it and see a real person makes the book much better.
That's what I appreciated learning a bit about this Henry that he meets in Sierra Leone, because like you said, it personalizes it a bit. It's not just data and reporting, scientific reporting. It's also you're getting to know this person who is kind of the impetus for the book in the first place. And the scientific side of things, just some of the statistics on tuberculosis were mind-blowing. That I had to pause a couple of times and write things down so that I could go read more about that specific statistic.
Yeah. It's in all of human history, it's the number 2 source of death. And number 1 is actually malaria by a huge margin.
Sure.
But tuberculosis, we don't think about that today, at least in the United States, because it's not very impactful to us, but actually it trails only malaria. In human history, it's the deadliest bacterial infection. Malaria is actually a parasite, but it's actually killed 2 billion people. And during the 1700s and the 1800s, when people began to live in close proximity because of the Industrial Revolution, 1 out of 4 deaths were actually caused by tuberculosis. And even today, it is the number one. It's the number 1 disease killer in the world. 1.25 million people a year die. It actually kills now more people than malaria. Sure. And of all the causes of people dying, it's number 5. It's behind things like heart attacks and strokes and things like that. It's just people don't realize the terror and the impact that tuberculosis had during particularly the 1700s and the 1800s.
Because it wasn't understood, and yet it was. It spreads easily. It kills quickly. Today it's considered an entirely preventable, entirely curable disease, but not then.
I'll take exception to one thing you said. It doesn't kill quickly.
Oh, it kills
sorry. It kills very slowly.
I should say effectively.
Effectively,
but not quickly. The opposite of quick.
Even today in the world, about a quarter of the world's population are infected with tuberculosis. Most of them don't get sick. It's typically attacks. It's what they call an opportunistic disease, that it attacks people who have compromised immune systems. So if you happen to have HIV or something like that, then you become more susceptible. And actually it doesn't kill everybody. About 25% of people recover. We have no idea why. We have no idea why some people survive and other people don't.
That's the part that's interesting to me on the scientific side of both this book and tuberculosis in general, that despite this being so well known and not at all new, there are so many things that we don't understand, like that. Why some people just seem to sneeze twice and move on.
It's an interesting bacteria, because evidently it's a bacteria that has a shell around it, and the shell made it more difficult to deal with it. But the shell will just kind of spontaneously at some point kind of open up. And so it can be in your body, not cause any kind of a problem, and then it kind of eats its way through the shell and does its dirty deed.
That is, and this starts in the lungs, right, usually on most people, and can mimic a lot of other, very, far less harmful issues you can have with your lungs, including a flu or a cold or really bad asthma, things like that. But then it quickly progresses to the rest of the organs. If I'm understanding what I'm learning quickly from the book, it's the way it's spread is interesting because it is what is the word again? Mycobacterium. That's a word that's brought up in the book a lot that I've written down here. That makes it a bit different than, like a cold virus or a flu virus. But it still spreads easily in tight-knit communities.
And it's also very resistant. A lot of things like the COVID, once it's out in the air in a matter of just a few hours, it's dead. Tuberculosis can lay on the surface for 6 months and still be alive. And so
that is wild.
I think that's one of the reasons it became so infectious. The other thing, one of the things that happened is again, I mentioned during the Industrial Revolution that people moved off farms. They moved into close proximity. They're living in areas close to one another. And that caused the spread of tuberculosis to become much more rapid, just the proximity of people.
That was kind of an interesting. So oftentimes when I'm listening to a book and I'm learning a lot, I'll have to pause, and I did that several times in what I've heard of this one so far. I'll have to pause and go research another thing that kind of came up, and that was one thing. When he's talking about that in the book, I remember I had to go find it, but I remembered a discussion actually in a political science class at USU of all places Dr. Anthony Peacock, but talk about why he was talking about why there was this almost instinctual reaction, in the earliest days of civilization for tribes to remain isolated and not interact with each other and not war with each other either, because then you'd interact with each other. And what that caused is that these diseases would break out. They'd wipe out an entire tribe.
Right, but just that tribe.
Then it was just that tribe.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And so I had to go find that, the book that, was part of that lecture that day. And, there's a whole evolution, I guess, of these diseases behind our moving away from that tribalism, which isn't really an argument to go back to it, of course, but it is interesting.
I was thinking when you were talking about when you were looking and you wanted to find something. It's interesting over the years. I was thinking we've done this for 6-8 years, maybe something like that. We've probably done over 100 books. But it's interesting how it's changed over time, just in the last couple of years. So today, as I was preparing for this, I looked at my notes, and I think there's something I don't know. Maybe it's not in the book, but I'd like to know it.
Sure.
And within 30 seconds, I can go to an AI bot, and I've got the answer. I mean, I can't tell you how much of what we're going to talk about today are things that I just thought that would be interesting to know. And I went and instantly found it in ways that even 3 years ago would have been impossible to find.
Yeah. That's what, and it makes, like I say, it causes this thing now where I'm listening along and I'll have to pause and then do a little side quest
but you
on
do
my
that
phone.
because it's so easy now. You're willing to stop because you know it's easy to find. Yeah.
Yeah, you don't have to drive down to the library or even turn the computer on anymore. You just pull out your phone, look it up quick, and go, and then go back to the book.
I think I mentioned this before, but in my early career at Utah State, there'd be an element of data, just a number, even a single number that I need. I'll go over to the university library, go over to the government documents. Sometimes it'd take me a whole morning.
Yeah.
Now I could find the same information literally in a couple of minutes.
Sure. Yeah, I remember going up to that super heated upper floor at the old USU library for the microfiche machine. And you don't do that anymore. But that actually kind of brings us back to one of the themes of this book in a way that, exactly what you and I were just talking about, the ease of that type of thing that really is trivial and for our own curiosity. And yet you have this disease that is preventable, curable. There's a vaccine, at least for young people. And yet it is still really prevalent.
It's a social, not a scientific problem now in the world.
And that's an interesting way to put that.
Yeah.
That is... So, what, as I've been listening, I keep finding myself going back to this question of what does it take to kind of push over that speed bump and resolve some of the social issues behind this? But that's an easier question to ask than,
Yeah. Well, the problems are, first of all, some of the countries, particularly Sierra Leone, where this little Henry was, the problem is the infrastructure. Their medical infrastructure just isn't adequate. But the bigger problem is the cost. And the other problem, too, is when you've got a disease that becomes now a disease of poor people in third world countries, the pharmaceutical companies no longer have the incentive to find new cures.
Yeah.
The money just isn't there. And when they do have cures, in a lot of cases, these countries simply can't afford the cost of providing widespread help.
Sure.
But Henry, for example... the author encounters Henry at a hospital in Sierra Leone. Little boy comes up to him, very energetic, looks like he's about 9. Turns out he's 17. And the reason is because his body, he had tuberculosis, but because of the cost, they delayed for many years the diagnosis, so they didn't know he had it. There are times when they weren't making much progress because they couldn't get help, and so his mother takes him to a faith healer and discontinues his treatment. And what happens is when you discontinue treatment, then that causes the disease to become more resistant to drugs. And so the next time you go back on the drugs, it doesn't work as well.
Sure.
Finally, in his particular case, he became kind of a test case. And there was a doctor who went out of the way to secure the drugs and found a way to pay the cost. And so Henry ends up being a success story.
Yeah.
But in many cases, these people die simply because they're not diagnosed soon enough, or if they are, that the money isn't available to do modern effective treatments.
Which is interesting. And do you think, at least what I've gotten to in the book so far, you've finished it. I'm about 25% away from the end. But I I wondered throughout if it has to do with the nature of the treatment, where it's I don't remember the word he uses in the book now, but it's sort of a sequence of treatments. Instead, it's not one pill you pop or one vaccine you take. Do you think that factors in?
I'm sure it does.
This requires going back once a month for
that's a good point too, because a lot of times people don't have easy access to medical facilities. It requires traveling a long distance, and maybe the drugs aren't there. So I think that's a big part of it.
Sure, this is. I kept thinking of another one too that obviously not on this scale, but I am always surprised when I read statistics about rabies. This is another one that, we know how to treat this. We know how to prevent it, all of this stuff. But a surprising number of people die of rabies each year. And it's a similar story. These are people without access to, readily available medical treatments that just can be expensive, especially if you're uninsured, even here in the U.S. But we're talking about parts of the world where they're 2 hours from anything even closely resembling a hospital.
Exactly, and they may not be confident of modern medical treatments. There's a culture that causes one to be hesitant about that. This is a little bit political, but the Agency for International Development was dismantled about a year and a half ago, and that had a huge impact. Some people have estimated that because of the pullback on the treatment of that agency, that as many as 1 million people have died around the world.
Really? Just because of the end of treatment
the end of treatment,
That's
for E. coli and a lot of other types of things.
And then that, of course, has an exponential growth issue behind it as well, right? For the spread and as you said, this is a bacteria basically that can sit on a surface for up to 6 months in many different climates and temperatures. And I forget, he mentions this in the book. The estimated death toll each year is about 1 million people.
Yeah, about 1.25 million.
If I'm remembering right.
Yeah. But of those, probably 10,000, maybe United States, and the rest, the vast majority are in third world countries.
That is. A quick note on I appreciate this about the book, which, it's hard because the young man's story, this Henry that he meets, the personalization of all of this scientific reporting that he's doing in the book, you do get to know this person and put a face, as you said, put a face on the story. But then he also talks a little bit about, if I'm remembering correctly, there's some big unknowns in this young man's history, like they don't know how he got it. They don't know where he got it. They don't know, at the point of the writing of the book, at least, they don't know if others in his family have been exposed. There seem to be these pockets of resistance to even that level of exploration from doctors, a suspicion.
Well, that's part of what the author is talking about is that the diagnostic test for tuberculosis is fairly simple, but it's not readily available. And so one of Henry's problems was that apparently he had the disease for years before he was diagnosed. If he'd been diagnosed earlier, the whole treatment process would have been much simpler.
That is, and he will. So people, even after receiving treatment, if it stays in your body long enough, a lot of the organ damage is permanent and can affect growth, brain development, lung and heart issues that can pop up as you age. Even after, so the whole key is spotting it early and beginning treatment, and then also completing
the treatment. Yeah, because a half completed treatment can actually be worse because it causes the bacteria to rejuvenate and become more drug resistant when you go back on drugs.
Create like a super drug. That's why it's also why you should stop using those antibacterial hand soaps, folks. Same concept on this. It's the For the People book club with Craig Petersen here in the studio. The book we're talking about this month is Everything is Tuberculosis, The History and Persistence of Our Deadliest Infection by best-selling author and journalist John Green. This was a New York Times and Washington Post bestseller for a long time, about a year. Won awards from Scientific American, Science News, Chicago Sun-Times, and as Craig mentioned, was chosen as a Good Reader's Choice in Nonfiction Award winner. The book itself starts with the author, John Green, meeting a young man named Henry Ryder in Sierra Leone in 2019 and wanting to tell his story, and it led to this book, Everything is Tuberculosis. We'll keep the conversation going. Again, it's the For the People Book Club with Craig Petersen here in the studio. More right after this look at the news with KVNU's J.D. Walker.
Take a look at this hour's news headlines here on KVNU. I'm J.D. Walker. A new Utah law taking effect Wednesday requires adult websites to bypass virtual private network protections to verify users' age. Under Senate Bill 73, websites where more than 33% of content is considered harmful to minors must verify users are at least 18. The legislation builds on a 2023 law by explicitly targeting VPNs, which hide a user's location and previously allowed minors to bypass age gates. Bill sponsor, State Senator Cal Musselman, defended the measure as common sense safeguard, comparing it to age restrictions on alcohol and tobacco to protect children from exploitation. However, privacy advocates warn the legislation forces internet users to surrender their anonymity. Aaron Mackey, a deputy legal director for Electronic Frontier Foundation, argued the requirement fundamentally intrudes on online privacy and daily VPN users who have no intention of accessing adult content. In other news, a 59-year-old Cornish man pleaded guilty on April 22nd to operating a meth lab and possessing more than 20 guns. Kelly Nagel accepted a plea deal in First District Court in Logan, admitting to a first-degree felony of operating a clandestine laboratory. He also pleaded guilty to 3 third-degree felony counts of possessing a firearm as a restricted person and 1 count of possession of a controlled substance. Under the agreement, 13 other charges were dismissed. Prosecutors with the Cash-Rich Drug Task Force searched Nagel's home on February 1st, finding weapons, methamphetamine, lab equipment covered in white powder. Nagel told police that he hid the lab from his family and ordered coca tea online. He also stated he believed his prior felony convictions were too old to restrict his firearm ownership. Nagel remains free on $25,000 bail and will be sentenced on June 17th. Finally, as attorneys await a judge's decision on whether to delay the preliminary hearing in a high-profile capital murder case, prosecutors say they are willing to proceed without DNA evidence to keep the schedule intact. Tyler Robinson, 33, faces potential death sentence for the September 10th fatal shooting of 31-year-old political activist Charlie Kirk at Utah Valley University. Defense attorneys requested postponing the May 18th to 21st hearing to review evidence and asked to close portions of the proceedings. The Utah County Attorney's Office argued that the delay, stating that the sufficient probable cause to proceed without DNA results. Prosecutors also pushed back against the defense motion to hold them in contempt over media statements. The state argued it was merely correcting misleading defense claims about inconclusive ballistic reports. The 4th District Court judge is scheduled to rule on Friday on the schedule and courtroom camera access. Your locally owned Napa Auto Parts bringing you the look at this weather. Going to be rainy throughout the day, getting up to 64. Those showers tapering off tonight with partly cloudy skies and 32. Wednesday going to be beautiful, sunny and 61. That's a look at this hour's news headlines here on KVNU. I'm J.D. Walker.
ABC News, I'm Dave Packer. Secretary of State Marco Rubio says the ceasefire with Iran is still on and that Operation Epic Fury is now over. Meanwhile, President Trump suggesting that Iran hasn't yet violated the ceasefire despite firing shots in the Strait of Hormuz and into the United Arab Emirates Monday, saying, "I'll let you know when it's breached."
Well, you'll find out because I'll let you know. They know what to do and they know what to do. They know what not to do, more importantly, actually.
As some ships are now transiting the strait, the U.S. military assistance, oil prices still over $100 a barrel, gas prices rising, the national average now surpassing $4.50 a gallon. Global health officials investigating a suspected hantavirus outbreak on a cruise ship in the Atlantic. 3 people dead. Medics are working to evacuate sick passengers. A number of primary elections across the Midwest. We are watching races in Ohio, Michigan, and Indiana. This is ABC News.
Did you know you can cut your Rocky Mountain power bill by 40 to 50% without a single solar solar panel? With the new time of use rates, power is 4.5 times more expensive in the evening, but cheap during the day. At Greenbox Solar, we install smart home batteries that charge up when electricity is cheap, then power your home during peak hours. Solar is totally optional and can be added in the future, but savings are guaranteed. Drop by Greenbox Solar's showroom in South Logan to see the hardware for yourself. Visit our website at poweredbygreenbox.com.
This Mother's Day, make it extra special with Kids Shop Free at S.C. Needham Jewelers. When you spend $149 or more, your child gets to pick a free gift for Mom from a curated collection of beautiful jewelry. A gift with purchase. You've heard it, kids eat free. Now they shop free for Mother's Day. A small piece of jewelry, a big moment she'll never forget. Open 10 to 7. For the occasions and people that matter most. S.C. Needham Jewelers, Mill the Block at the sign of the clock.
At Adams Wealth Advisors, they believe that successful wealth management is all about planning. And whether you've done a lot of planning or a little, Adams Wealth Advisors is here to help. If you're transitioning a business, searching for the most up-to-date tax strategies, need help managing investments, or need help with estate planning, Adams Wealth Advisors has your back. Visit adamswealthadvisors.com. That's adamswealthadvisors.com for more information or to schedule an appointment.
With inflation at record highs, why buy new if you can repair your current machine? Daryl's Appliances factory-trained technicians spend hundreds of hours in training each year to ensure your appliance is repaired right the first time. You can have peace of mind. They offer no-risk service, meaning if you want to purchase new instead of repair, you can apply up to $95 of your service call towards an appliance purchase. See store for details. Daryl's West on Airport Road, open until 6 p.m. on weekdays, 5 on Saturday.
This summer, experience clear vision without the daily hassle of glasses or contacts. Whether you're on the trail, at the lake, or just enjoying time outside, LASIK can simplify how you see the world. This is Dr. Karen at Northern Utah Eye Center. We use advanced technology and a personalized approach to help each patient achieve their best possible vision. If you've been thinking about LASIK, now is the time to see if you're a candidate. Call or text 435-752-2020 to schedule your consultation.
You're gonna love what you see.
Senior Moments, sponsored by the Empowering Seniors Group on News Talk KVNU.
My name is Bruce Lee. I am here with my co-host Sid Roeder. We're here for another fun show.
This radio show is sponsored by the Empowering Seniors Group, which is a group of professionals that has dedicated their time and efforts to provide information that is hopefully useful to seniors, their family members, caretakers, and really anybody who's interested.
Senior Moments, every Saturday morning at 7:30, right here on News Talk KVNU.
KVNU's For the People. The For the People book club underway here with Craig Petersen in the studio. We're talking Everything is Tuberculosis, the history and persistence of our deadliest infection by author and journalist John Green. And Craig, this is, obviously, first question that popped into my head when you suggested this book and before I'd started reading it is, what's with the title?
Yeah.
Everything is tuberculosis.
Yeah, in fact, let me kind of talk about that as we go through the history of how people understood tuberculosis. There's some kind of fun examples. Originally, people thought that the disease was hereditary because if your parents had tuberculosis, you were more likely to get it yourself. But now we understand that that's true in the sense, but it's not born, it's breathed. You know, if your parents have tuberculosis and you're living with them in a house all day, then you're more likely to be infected. And the second stage was what we'll call, it's a theory called miasma, and it applied not just to tuberculosis, but also to cholera and the plague and all kinds of things. And the notion was that people caught diseases because of bad air, that the air would just kind of cause you to get sick. And then in the 1800s, the 1700s and the 1800s, there's a fascinating period where tuberculosis was actually considered to be an attractive disease.
Really?
It was kind of a prestige disease, yeah. It used to be that the term tuberculosis is about 120 years old. They used to call it consumption.
Yeah.
And the reason it was called consumption is because it literally consumes your body. You just kind of waste it away.
Yeah.
And but it was considered attractive because it tended to kill refined poets and beautiful women, and there's what they call the consumptive look, that people, as they got more and had become more serious in tuberculosis, they become thin, they get a pale skin, their cheeks would be flushed, and it actually became kind of a depiction of high fashion. For a period of time, that was what the beautiful woman looked like. She was pale and thin and so forth.
So it was actually an admirable physical appearance.
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
Interesting.
And then, but maybe the most interesting period is what they call a sanatorium period. And this goes from about 1880 to the 1920s. And it's a little bit connected to that whole idea of miasma, because people decided that the way to deal with tuberculosis was people needed lots of sun. They needed a dry climate. They needed not to talk very much. They needed not to move very much. They needed to be alone. And so all across the United States, we began to construct these sanatoriums where tubercular patients were sent, essentially for years and years and years, usually till they died.
Yeah.
And there was a time when there were many beds in sanatoriums in the United States as there were hospitals. But there's some funny things that came out of this whole notion of kind of the sanatorium-type treatment. For example, there's a guy by the name of John Stetson. You might remember him because he's the hat guy.
The Stetson
guy, yeah. And he had tuberculosis. And so he came west. A lot of people, you'll see in just a minute, a lot of times the solution was to go west. And he came out and he saw all these people that they were wearing coonskin caps or wool hats. And he said, those attract fleas. They don't provide any sun protection. And so while he was out here in the attempt to recover from his tuberculosis, that he developed the cowboy Stetson hat. That's how it came about. Do you know what an Adirondack chair is?
Yeah.
You seen them? Yeah. So they have a very high back.
I know they're harder to build than you'd think.
They are, and they're harder to get out of than you think.
Very hard to get out of, too.
So they have a very high back, and they have a sloping seat and wide armrests. But the reason we have those today is because those are the kind of chairs that they had in sanatoriums, and they thought those were good for people because of their posture. We have Mickey Mouse because of tuberculosis.
This is an interesting story.
Yeah. So Walt Disney had a brother who had tuberculosis, and the brother came to Los Angeles, and Walt Disney went out there after his brother who had tuberculosis, and of course set up his studio and ended up developing Mickey Mouse. New Mexico may be a state, or at least it became a state when it did because of tuberculosis, that it was a dry, sunny climate. And the problem was that in tuberculosis there were standards. There were standards for a state to become a state in terms of population. But most of the population in New Mexico were indigenous people. They were Mexicans and so forth, and Native Americans. But there was a huge influx, and about 1900, 1910, from 10 to 25% of the population of New Mexico were people who were tubercular patients. And that influx of those types of patients put New Mexico over the top where they could become a state.
Sure. So it was a lot of people considered it a positive.
Yeah.
Even though this is, disease and death we're talking about.
Colorado Springs, the same thing. About a third of the population of Colorado Springs at one point were tubercular patients. So there are a number of locations that, because of their climate, were just considered ideal. You remember Doc Holliday from Wyatt Earp fame?
Yeah, I'm your Huckleberry.
Yeah, he was a dentist, but he was also had tuberculosis.
Yeah,
and of course you don't want a dentist who has tuberculosis coughing down your throat. And so he came west again, tried to find a career, and ended up at the OK Corral. And died in his 30s. But
untreated tuberculosis,
untreated
right?
tuberculosis, yeah. The sanitation thing actually was ineffective. It may have prolonged people's lives. It certainly didn't save their lives. What it did do, though, is it had an impact because it did is to separate the population. So it separated the contagious people from non-contagious people. So it probably reduced the transmission rate.
And that's one thing that's highlighted in this book, not really directly by the author, but it comes up again and again. It reminded me, so I wondered if I was picking up on this because of other books that I know you and I have both read and even talked about here on the show, dealing with similar things like the tracking of diseases, the discovery of, but it reminded me that it hasn't been as long as most of us think that we switched from, you mentioned the miasma thing, when they believed that these strange vapors would come up out of the ground and cause sickness and death, and then it wasn't that long ago that we switched over to this. I forget the term for it. It starts with a Z, but it's the idea. It's when medical science basically switched to understanding germs and viruses.
Well, it's called the germ theory. I mean, that's a simple
germ
name
theory.
for it.
And they that wasn't that long. That wasn't as long ago as people think.
Yeah,
as we all
fact,
believe.
another example of that during the time of the construction of the Panama Canal.
Sure.
Thousands and thousands of people died of yellow fever.
Yeah.
And scientists had a hard time convincing people that was caused by mosquitoes. People, again, thought it was this miasma thing, that it was just bad air. And it was, the population was terribly resistant. Let me just talk about the germ theory, because that's kind of the last stage of this.
Because if you think about this, if someone walked up to you and you'd never heard of this before and they proposed it to you, it sounds a bit like science fiction.
But you can't see it.
Yeah, they're these tiny little living organisms that want to make us ill. Oh, come on, you crazy person.
The germ theory may be the greatest medical advancement in human history. And it starts actually with tuberculosis. There was a guy by the name of Robert Koch, and he was just a small-time doctor in Germany, and his wife gave him a microscope, and he got looking at stuff, and he ended up identifying the bacteria that caused tuberculosis and cholera and anthrax, and won the Nobel Prize in 1905 for medicine. But he was the first one to really identify that these infectious diseases were caused not by bad air, but actually by microparticles.
And many were skeptics.
Oh, they were incredible skepticism, yeah.
He was considered a quack for a long time because of this.
But as a result of that, the last phase was there was a preventative vaccine that was developed in the 1920s. And then in the 1940s, there was a drug called streptomycin that actually was used, became a cure for tuberculosis. But even on that, the history... And
that's just an antibiotic, right?
Yeah, it's an antibiotic, yeah. But the history of that's really interesting. Scientists observed there was a guy with his graduate students in a lab, and what he observed is that tuberculosis tends to die when it's in the soil. There's something in the soil that kills it. So what they did is they actually went through 10,000 different soil samples and finally found a mold in a manure field that would kill tuberculosis.
Really?
But that's only half of it, because the other part of that has to do with the sick chicken. Because there was a sick chicken that was brought into
There's always a sick chicken. All of these stories have a sick chicken in them somewhere.
But anyway, the sick chicken was brought into the lab, and they found the same mold, the tuberculosis-killing mold, was in the chicken's throat. And what that told them is that the mold could be in a live entity and the person wouldn't die. So first point one is the mold would kill tuberculosis, but point two was it wouldn't kill people. And what they found out, though, is that streptomycin, often people would become resistant to it. And so they developed what they call a cocktail of drugs, the same thing they do with HIV. So there's a series of drugs that... and it's kind of a constant fight because the tuberculosis bacteria continues to evolve. Yeah. So they have to continue to evolve drugs that will take care of it.
And being a bacteria, that it can evolve, as I understand it, easier and more quickly than viruses. And viruses are pretty quick to but you're talking weeks versus months when you're talking bacteria and viruses. Yeah. And the idea of... So what amazes me is that we didn't accidentally, through trial and error of treatment, which was necessary, it blows me away we didn't accidentally create a super tuberculosis, because we did everything that you could to do that in our history of trying to find a treatment, right? So we got lucky on that one. This is, again, it's a fascinating read. I'm not quite finished with it. Craig has finished it. And you can find it everywhere. It's Everything is Tuberculosis, The History and Persistence of Our Deadliest Infection by John Green. He has written this book based on a 2019 meeting that he had by accident with Henry Ryder, a young man with tuberculosis who was a patient at a hospital in Sierra Leone. And they became friends, and he wanted to tell that boy's story, but also it became this broader story of tuberculosis, our lack of understanding, followed by understanding, followed by finding ways to treat and even prevent tuberculosis, and yet it remains widely prevalent
and Jason,
in the world.
When we come back, I'll show you how Sherlock Holmes fits into this.
Really?
Yeah.
Now I'm excited. I haven't gotten to that part of the book yet. Very cool. Everything is Tuberculosis by John Green is our book discussion today on the For the People Book Club with Craig Petersen here in the studio, and we'll be back with more right after this.
News Talk 610 AM, 102.1 FM, KVNU.
Hey Utah, have you heard? Nuclear energy might be coming to our state. Now, before your brain jumps straight into sci-fi movies, let's talk about what nuclear actually does. Nuclear technology helps power our nation's submarines, supports life-saving cancer treatments, and produces reliable electricity for millions of homes. That said, nuclear power also comes with a lot of misconceptions. Don't worry, we get it. Energy decisions matter, and Utahns deserve the facts. Learn more about nuclear and what it can mean for you. Visit energy.utah.gov/nuclear.
Here's Chad, the lawn doctor, with a tip for your lawn.
Just a couple tips for this summer for a healthier lawn. Raise your lawnmower blade a notch or two. Longer grass helps conserve water and fight against stress. Double check your sprinkler coverage and watering times. Then call the lawn doctor to put down a grub preventative and to try our popular new 2-service soil enrichment program.
Fertilizer, weed, and pest control. Call the lawn doctor at 753-LAWN or go to lawndoctor.com.
This is Logan River head golf professional Jeff John. The golf course is in full swing, the new carts are in, and the men's and ladies clubs are going strong. Starting today through next Wednesday, May 6th, all punch passes will be on sale at the lowest price of the season. Prices will never be this low again. Now through next Wednesday, mention this ad and receive 20% off any men's, ladies wear, or hats in stock. Logan River Golf Course, play well, play fair, play fast.
Hi, this is Gordon Deal. Wednesday, on This Morning, America's First News. The influential Cuban-American community in South Florida is putting pressure on President Trump. Hear what the key voting bloc is demanding. Also, the airline industry is bracing for aftershocks from the Spirit Airlines collapse. There's not much good news here for flyers. And the cities that offer the most job prospects for new grads. Wednesday, on This Morning, America's First News. From 4 to 6 on News Talk KVNU, 610 AM and 102 FM. Your station for news and talk.
Lying beside.
Welcome back to KVNU's For the People Book Club with Craig Petersen here in the studio. We are talking Everything is Tuberculosis, a book by author John Green, author and journalist John Green, and is available everywhere. Quick setup again. In 2019, Green meets Henry Ryder, a young man with tuberculosis, at a hospital in Sierra Leone. They become friends, and he wants to tell this little boy's story. And then that leads to him researching the first question that pops into his head: how have we not killed this disease off? And the story, the answer to that question is both a tragic and a fascinating one. So we've been discussing it here in the studio. Before we left for that break, Craig set this up perfectly. He said we're talking about the Sherlock Holmes tie-in to this whole tuberculosis story.
So we talked about Robert Koch, and just to review, he's a doctor in Germany, and he was the first one to really identify that there were microorganisms that cause disease. He identified it in cholera and anthrax and tuberculosis. And as a consequence, that actually got into a huge fight with a couple of the other major scientists of the day. He was from Germany, Koch was. The others were, Pasteur and Lister were from my recollection is France, and they got into a fight for prestige. But Koch developed a treatment for tuberculosis. And it became hugely popular. In fact, he went to Berlin, and there was just basically a migration of people, scientists, but also tubercular patients who came to get cured. And hundreds and hundreds of people came there, and he promoted it as a cure. And Arthur Conan Doyle, who was the creator of Sherlock Holmes, at this particular time was just getting started. He hadn't written any books at all, and he was a doctor. I don't know if many people realize that, but he was actually a physician. But he was kind of an unsuccessful physician. Didn't have much of a practice. But he read about Koch's cure, and he decided, I want to learn something about this. And he had this investigative mind that he projected into Sherlock Holmes. And so uninvited, without any credentials, he goes to Berlin to see what's happening there with this supposed cure. And he gets the clinical results and observes the patients, and he realizes that what Koch is suggesting and what people are believing isn't true, that really what's happening is the people aren't being cured by Koch's treatment. They're actually dying. And what happens is that it's called tuberculin, actually makes the bacteria stronger and mobilizes them rather. And so what Sherlock Holmes, what Arthur Conan Doyle does, he goes back to England and he writes 2 major articles, scientific articles, and basically discredits what Koch is doing. And he's the one that basically identified this, and Koch ends up being discredited. It turns out that what he's doing has great value. In fact, it's still used today as a diagnostic tool, but it did exactly the wrong things in terms of a cure. But it was Arthur Conan Doyle who basically uncovered the fact that cure proposed by Koch was not effective.
That is fascinating. And you can understand, you mentioned the arguments they would get, and you can understand how personal this would become to these people. It was, we talked about this at the start of the hour, how easy it is to just look something up these days. But this was a day and age where people spent years researching and writing and trying to perfect this, and then they get emotionally invested in their work and they defend it. But also, it was a time when we didn't know a tenth of what we know now about the spread of disease.
These were brand new ideas.
Yeah.
And again, the problem was,
they seemed farcical almost.
Yeah, the problem was they were unseen. You had to have a microscope, and microscopes weren't as common then.
Can you imagine there's these tiny little things floating in the air.
They really exist. Sure, no, they don't exist.
Yeah, it really, you can understand how the natural, I think, inclination of everyone who first heard these theories to feel that there was not a lot to it.
Yeah.
And then also, this has always intrigued me about this, you had to prove it, which that's a very hard thing to do. Tuberculosis, for example, how do you prove that this is a bacteria that gets in and just starts growing? Because that's a very difficult thing to show.
I can't believe the segue you just gave me.
Did I set it up perfectly?
Oh my gosh, did you ever set it up? So Koch was discredited as a cure, but there's something called Koch's postulates that have become the gold standard for doing exactly what you're talking about. And there's 4 postulates. So here's what has to happen to determine what caused the disease. First of all, you have to identify a microorganism that exists in every person who has the disease, but in nobody who doesn't have the disease. That's point 1.
Okay.
Secondly, you have to be able to extract that microorganism and to culture it and recreate it. Basically, put it in a Petri dish so that you create additional ones of these microorganisms. Okay. That's the second one. The third one is that you have to take that cultured organism, put it in an otherwise healthy organism, usually a rat or a rabbit or a mouse or something like that, and cause it to have the disease.
Okay.
And then fourthly, to extract the microorganism from that person that's been infected and to demonstrate that it's exactly the same one. And that's the scientific process that allows us to identify the culprit and disease.
That is honestly fascinating. It is. You think about this on its cutting edge, and we take it for granted now. We just know this is how everything works, right? But to advance these ideas just blows me away.
People thought these people were nuts when they first proposed this. It was so different. Yeah.
And understandably, because it does seem pretty far-fetched if it's news to you or new to you. And again, we accept it as just the way it works now. And then the book, of course, wraps this all back around into saying, again, as you said, this is more the fact that tuberculosis is still so widespread is more of a social issue than a science issue at this point. And there are other diseases that would probably fall into the same.
Well, HIV does.
HIV, yeah.
Yeah. E. coli to some extent.
That is. I have to throw this out for listeners as well as we wrap up here. You recommended sort of maybe a companion read for people called The Remedy.
It's called The Remedy, Robert Koch, Arthur Conan Doyle, and the Quest to Cure Tuberculosis. And it actually goes through the process of creating the cure that we just talked a little bit about here. It's just a wonderful book. It's a little more scientific, but it talks a lot about the fight between the scientists.
I think I'm going to follow up Everything is Tuberculosis with the remedy.
Yeah.
It sounds like a perfect.
I liked it.
All right. Well, thank you for both recommendations and for your time today as well. Craig Petersen here for the For the People Book Club. He'll be back with us for a new episode next month. And to our listeners, thank you for being here as well. Tomorrow on the show, Box Elder County Commissioner Lee Perry will join us. And stick around. Dave Ramsey next here on KVNU Logan.